Hi, this is Gary. You're watching a retail loss prevention overview. Typically we refer to loss prevention as just LP. My background in this is I worked 5 years as a team leader in a retail store and 7 years total. And many of those 5 years when I was a team leader, I focused on loss prevention at store meetings and stuff like that, and tried to look for ways to improve our shrinkage numbers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide you with an overview of how loss prevention works and certain things to watch out for here. Let's go ahead and start with how we can define loss prevention, and I would like to say there's two areas, or maybe three, black, white, and gray. Black can be referred to as internal. White can be referred to as external, and obviously there's a gray area as well. We'll start with the gray area here. The gray area is employee discounts. Now let's move on to external. One area is shoplifting. Another area is break-ins, robbery, and then we have to worry about fraud. It could be check fraud, credit card, gift card fraud, and even refund fraud, which I don't have listed, but it'll come up in just a second here. And then on the internal side, you have employee theft, employee errors, and then you have this kind of nexus, or where you can have employees colluding with like a ring of people, which could be really bad. I didn't have any of that in my experience at the store I was at, but it's something to definitely watch out for. We're going to cover each one of these in a little more detail. And what you have to worry about is you shrink. You want to keep that as low as possible. Shrinkage is basically when you lose inventory or inventory gets damaged, stuff like that, and that hurts your bottom line. You want to try to prevent that, and one of the major ways is communication. We're going to go ahead and take a look at each individual piece here. I'll start off with employee discounts. Key thing with employee discounts is you want to communicate with your employees, or have policies and procedures in place to communicate what is acceptable, what is not. I like to think of, at least from my accounting background when I went to college, the key thing is internal controls, where you have checks and balances in place. And that's not just for employee discounts. It can be, preventing employee errors, employee theft, and stuff like that. You want to have try to have checks and balances and communicate, make sure everybody understands what the policy is, and not just your key employees, but your new employees as well. Now, what we did when I worked at the store was we had a 10% employee discount. And because the number was not super high, that really curbed abuse, to where you didn't have a lot of problems because the amount was so low. You wouldn't run into abuse problems, and that's probably one of the better policies they have. So you don't have, like small profit margin items become like loss leaders and stuff like that. Another idea is you could cap amounts. You could have like a person keeps track of it, and your corporate headquarters cap amounts so they can only spend like X dollars per year. Moving on to item number 2, shoplifting. Shoplifting is definitely something to be concerned about. What we did at our store is we had security tags. We would white tag the expensive items, and we'd also have tags that were really hard to get off on the clothing, where only the cashiers could have a special thing to get the pens off from it, and it'd go beep 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 if it didn't get taken off at the door, just to try to protect your high value items from walking out the door. Otherwise your margins can drop really quickly. We'd also lock up the high value items, like say we had a DeWalt tools or something like that, or propane tanks would be locked up. If we had riding mowers in the front, we'd lock those up and then take those in at night, because those, at the time I was working there, retail from anywhere from like $900 to like $3,000-$4,000, and that could be a huge loss. You want to keep your valued items in employee view, like if you have any gift cards and stuff like that, so people can't walk out with them. Another important area to counter shoplifting is having good customer service. And it's really a win-win in that your sales are going to increase, customers are more satisfied, so they're likely to come back for repeat sales, and it helps them find stuff, because in retail you're always changing if you're in a bigger store, the store I was at did about 3 to 5 million per year. You're always changing your planograms, your end caps, and stuff like that. So sometimes customers aren't as familiar, and it helps to point out where the products are moving to and stuff like that. And the other important thing is it can deter potential shoplifting. If you have employees coming to greet you, you're less likely to try something because you know you're being watched or followed, or, well, I mean, not really watched, because of customer service you're not, but from a shoplifting standpoint it comes across as you're being watched. The next item on the list is break-ins. And what we would do, or what I did at our store, is we'd lock all the doors when we're closed, obviously, and everybody else does that. And then we had an alarm system, and only anybody that was a manager could change the code. And if we lost a manager for whatever reason, we would go ahead and change the alarm system, so we wouldn't have to worry about the internal employee theft and stuff like that. And then of course we'd bring in our outdoor merchandise, anything we had outdoors that was high value, bring that in at night so it wouldn't get stolen. Another item is we have on here is robbery. Basically, to combat that, we keep cash at a minimum in a safe. If we had, I think we had, at my store we had like 5 registers, so we'd have like maybe $200 in each one, and everything else would be deposited at night or during the day. So let's say we had a busy day during the day, we'd have one of the managers go to the bank and drop off the cash. I think the most I ever got stuck with depositing was like 30,000, but most of the time the numbers are much lower than that. Rarely would we get over 10,000, because I mean your sales are basically 3 components, or at least when I worked there they were 3 components. You have cash, credit, and check, and usually cash makes up maybe a third or a quarter of your total sales for the day. The next item we have to worry about on the external side is fraud. There's check, credit card, gift cards, and refunds. That's a whole bunch of stuff to worry about. For checks, when I worked at the store, what we do is managers have to approve any checks over 100. Sometimes it was 50. What we basically do is verify their ID and make sure they are who they pretend to be. Now on the credit card, there's magnetic strips, point of sale. I didn't do a lot with that. I think that's more on the credit card company to do. For gift cards, there's obviously the encrypted metal strips. Now the store I worked at, we didn't really have a lot of gift cards. We did more, instead of doing gift cards, we would do gift certificates. So that was something we'd have to watch out for, make sure there's no fake ones in the system, and then communicate not just store-wide but to other stores and stuff like that to watch out for. Another important area is refunds. And our place, we require manager approval for refunds over a certain amount, and another thing you don't want to do is refund cash for a credit purchase or a check purchase. If they purchase with a check, you want to refund it to their checking account if you can, and if they purchase with a credit card, refund it to their credit card. And that kind of is a way to cut down on fraud and stuff like that, where some people might do gift cards and then try to get a refund or something to that effect, and then figure out a way to walk out with cash. And then also communicate, like if it's purchased at another store, you definitely want to communicate with a manager of the store if it's a high value item or something like that. I've had situations where we've had to watch out for people like that and not give them the refund. And but the key thing obviously is communicate, whether it's communicate with another store, communicate with headquarters, or communicate with the other managers. And obviously you want to communicate with your employees to try to reduce this as much as possible. Now if we move on to the internal side, there's employee theft, and that is one of the biggest issues. And what makes it really difficult to handle is the collusion factor, which can conceal it. There's a simple employee theft where they just steal items, or cashiers might try to steal cash. or they'll void sales and stuff like that, which brings to the next point, voids. You want to have management look over any voids and stuff like that, because that's the easiest way to steal, is when you bring something up and then you void it and then the item goes through. Another area to look at is refunds. Employees, if they're well placed and know how to game the system, can hit refunds, and sometimes it takes either a really good manager or a really good auditor to come through. And then another item is special discounts. I had several issues where I would see like a discounted chair, or normally a broke chair had like 10-20% off normally is what it would go for, and I seen an employee get one for 75% off plus a 10% discount, and I investigated further into that and uncovered some stuff that was not pleasant. The employee theft part can be a significant portion of shrink, as I've listed earlier, and as I've said, you need to have good managers or people that are paying attention to detail, or auditors, but you want to try to have a good internal controls to prevent that as much as possible. Another item that's actually very big is employee errors. Now, employee errors is not quite what most people think it is. In retail, you usually have a slow season, and then you have a busy season. In your slow season, you have your core full-time employees, and they're usually they should be your best employees. Most of the time they are. And then when you get to the busy season, you got to hire other employees. The part-time employees, they don't have as much training, they may not care as much. It depends. Sometimes you get good part-time employees, sometimes you get really bad ones. Now, your core full-time employees, they work during the 8 to 5, 9 to 5, where your part-time employees, work the later end and stuff like that, and you try to balance out where you have one core with your part-time employees, so you're less likely to have any critical stuff where you have errors and stuff like that. Because when you get to the busy season and you get the part-time employees, not all the time, but sometimes you get the low-paid people, sometimes you get what you're paid for in terms of competence and making mistakes and stuff like that. And the key thing I think here is that to prevent the problems, you want to communicate. You want to talk to them and make sure everything is clear, make sure they know what they can and cannot do. And then you want to make sure that when people are handling specific tasks, they're trained to do so. One other issue that part-time employees may have is you don't want them handling a lot of the shipping and receiving stuff unless they're really good at it, because you have potentials for damaged inventory, which doesn't really show up on shrink, but you gotta discount it to move it out of the stores. Say you have a bag of dog food and it gets ripped up. Well, now you get a market 10-15% off, to try to move it, or maybe even 20% depending on how much damage, and that can cost you a lot too. But back to the audit point, you want to make sure your stuff's all up to date, and that's usually done during the slow season when you don't have the part-time employees that are more likely to mess things up. This pretty much wraps up our loss prevention or LP overview. Hopefully this information was informative to you.